this. But having looked at Valhalla's Discovery Tour, I may as well do it for this first. This will be longer. So this will be not necessarily commentary as if I do my normal commentaries. It's basically me actually reading the stuff that you find, like the discovery points, which will be an entire part of itself, probably the end of this series, because that's going to take hours to do. But me going through the tours again, letting the dialogue talk, and then I'll read the little things that come with it each time. If you do want a version of this that has no commentary, and you just want to listen to the audio parts of the tours, I do have the other playthrough set list. It's probably one of my earliest ones. I think it was my second playlist I created, and they're all on there. And I think I just do a little introduction and then I just shut up. Maybe attempt to talk and then I just shut up. I really can't remember not watched them in ages. But this one is where I'm generally going to try. Maybe give a few opinions as well. Obviously, I'm not very versed in Greek history. What I know is what I've only been taught so far on my course. But let's just say when I came back to have a mooch around the Discovery Tour, I looked at things and went, oh yeah, that thing that happened. And plus, the Discovery Tour did help me in some of my sessions as it was, because I already knew certain things. I was like, oh yes, this, I know what this means, I know what this was. But anyway, enough digressing. Let us begin the Discovery Tour. I'm not really going to talk about Valhalla too much. I'll leave that to the actual Discovery Tour of that one. And this will be like the Origins Discovery Tour. It'll be split up into the whole selections of tours. Otherwise, again, they'll take far too long. Illness, pirate checks, and shipwrecks all appear to have been valid reasons. Oh, great. Thanks. So I didn't want to read that anyway. And some of the facts they say here is quite interesting. It's just a shame that they cut half of it out. Do 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 do. This is always a problem with these, the loading screens.
Here, visitor. You are about to embark on a journey of discovery through the rich and fascinating history of classical Greece. You'll become fully immersed in the painstakingly detailed world built for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which you are free to explore at your own pace, without any danger or time pressure. For a directed experience, take one of the many guided tours curated by prominent historians and archaeologists.
And me talking.
Exchange words with some of Greece's most famous historical persons. The classical Greece you are about to explore is at the peak of its glory. This period is synonymous with grand accomplishments of the physical and the mental. Architectural marvels which still stand today dot its landscape, while towering achievements in philosophy, political systems, and art still influence our modern society in profound ways. We hope you become engrossed in the dazzling riches of ancient Greece, and welcome you to your visit.
Yeah, right then. So, Daily Life is our first tour, but they have dropped us off at a tour that we don't need to do yet, because we're obviously going to go through them in this order. I think they've dropped us off at... Actually, I think they've dropped us off at a different one entirely. Never mind. Time to go to this one. I would try and do the Take Me to a Suggestive tour, but... A suggested, even. But I'm just going to click it from the menu. It's a lot easier. If I don't manage to get the quizzes correct, that'd be my fault. It's because I'm probably not really paying attention. Even though I probably should be. I wonder why they did that. Here, we beat those people. Let's have our hair long then. Alright. I'm going to be ignoring all the discovery points for now.
Greetings, Wanderer. It is my pleasure to introduce you to a unique tour. One that won't take you to impressive landmarks or famous battle sites, but through a typical Athenian home.
I may as well ask.
My name is Aspasia. Though I am not originally from Athens, I have climbed to the top of its social ladder using my wit and intellect. I've even earned the love of Pericles, one of the most powerful men in the city. The mind truly is a beautiful thing. If Olympus is Zeus's sanctuary, then my house is my own. It is a place where I can shelter myself from the noise and stress of city life.
I'm not sure if I'll ever actually cover the games themselves. They're a bit too long for my liking.
For an outgoing people like the Greeks, the house was a refuge of privacy. Inside, they could escape from the constant demands of civic life to enjoy the simple pleasures of family life. Look for me when you are done, and we can discuss the things you've seen. Farewell for now.
The house, or oikos, was a residence for Greek families and their slaves. Contrary to modern houses, which look outward, the Greek household was built to look inward on a courtyard. The courtyard was the house's central fixture. It was the building's main source of daylight, and also the location of religious altars dedicated to worship. The building itself was made up of familiar accommodations, including bedrooms, storage rooms, a kitchen, and a living room. Women were generally in charge of tending to the home, which in Greece was called oikonomia, a term that inspired the modern word economy.
Now, forgive my bad Greek translations as well. So, just saying. Certain rooms in Greek households were reserved exclusively for women and female slaves. These rooms were known as gynaikonitas, or as I say, or the gynaikon. The gynaikon were entirely separated from the men's section of the home, the andron, by a strong door, and were frequently situated in the house's upper stories. Men often hosted drinking parties called symposia in their section of the house. Women, meanwhile, kept to their section to pursue activities like tending to their appearance, looking after children, spinning and weaving, and playing musical instruments. I may get my glasses. Just so I don't have to keep opening and closing my eyes weirdly because I've got weird eyesight. Let's move on to the next one. Trying to run into the discovery point.
A pasta was a corridor that connected a house's courtyard to its residential section. Archaeological evidence from the city of Olynthos reveals that pastas were added to Greek home design in the 5th century BCE.
Greek houses were built on foundations of stone with mud, bricks and woodwork. Their floors were packed with mud, and with the exception of the Andron, which had a tiled floor, and their roofs were composed of tiles. In cities, houses were positioned next to one another, and usually had a room or shop that opened up onto the street. Windows were normally only found on the first floor, but rooms were arranged so that air could circulate through them from the open courtyard. The houses were heated with braziers of charcoal, which also helped light surrounding rooms. Furniture, meanwhile, was very simple, and consisted of couches, chairs, folding stools, tables, blankets, and cushions. Archaeological evidence also suggests that many other tools and objects were kept in the home, including vases, sieves, cauldrons, and basins. In other words, all your favourite commodities.
Greeks had no qualms about combining their work and their private lives, and many of them worked from home.
A lot of us know what that means.
Like blacksmiths, sculptors, and potters often had workshops in their houses. Some even operated small stores to sell their work. Similarly, doctors were known to treat patients in special offices located in their homes. Women also worked in the house and were responsible for making textiles, as well as producing clothes and supervising weaving, which was carried out by slaves. If the household was wealthy enough, they could even produce a surplus of textiles to sell in times of financial difficulty.
Smart move. Athenians supported themselves by carrying out a wide array of commercial and industrial activities. Most of the time, there was no distinction between where people worked and where they lived. For example, in Aristophanes' comedy Lysistrata, I've not long learned about this one, the character of the tavern keeper is shown serving wine in his own residence. Similarly, according to I told you this is where it's going to flop up. Desmond, we'll call him Desmond. The Demosthenes, the general Conon, ran an entire business in his own home. Teachers would even have schools inside their homes, such as the father of Aeschines, who taught an elementary school in his own house. Yeah, like I say, I'm probably going to stumble on some of these names. Especially if they're a bit...
The inner courtyard was the nexus of the house. Functionally, it allowed air to circulate, and also provided access to most of the rooms. It also sometimes housed a well or a cistern that collected rainwater. In the center of the courtyard was an altar to Zeus Hercules, who served as the protector of the household. Women would often use the space to sew and cook, while children used it as a play area. Furthermore, if the family had pets or animals, the courtyard was where they were allowed to run free.
Run around, run around. Based on scenes of household life depicted on ancient vases, Greek children had many different ways to entertain themselves. Artistic representations show them doing everything from spinning tops to riding a seesaw to playing knucklebones. And that's not some form of... is it happy slaps or whatever it was? I don't know, I'm probably dating myself with that reference. It's basically like a little dice game or something like that. Children also played with small figurines, animals, wheeled horses, carts and dolls. Terracotta or plastic copies of birds and other animals were also common toys. So basically, if you grew up with your little farmhouse, basically that, just made out of terracotta. Numerous dolls, such as a tiny figure of a woman, have survived to this day. The dolls were designed with articulated joints in their arms and legs, which allowed children to manipulate them into a variety of positions, which is, again, you think, considering some, going back to your farmhood toys, I mean, I used to have a load of them. I used to have a load of dinosaurs as well. Aside from, like, the really... things like... in my case, I had, like, a Jurassic Park-style dinosaurs, as well as the stuff you find in a typical toy shop. You find they weren't very articulated, where it's... I was kind of like, oh, so they did have articulated toys. That's kind of cool.
The bathroom was located in the back of the house. Much like today, it was used for cleaning and washing, although the Greeks used chamber pots instead of toilets. Most bathrooms had a luterion that could be filled with water for washing. Mirrors, razors, strigils and sponges could also be found in the bathroom, along with small vases called arebaloi, which were usually filled with perfume or oil.
Because yes, you wash yourself and then just lube yourself up with oil. I mean, it would have been fragranced as well. Plus, I think there was something in the oil they kind of said was a healthy property. I can't really remember. I'm sure we'll come across that when I think there is a tour on oil as well. Anyway, the Greeks viewed hair as a symbol of life and strength. Originally, hair loss signified old age or disease. I just thought of myself there. And the shortening or shaving of hair symbolised the loss of freedom. During the archaic period, men who had long hair were associated with the aristocracy. Wish I hadn't cut my hair now. In the 5th century BCE, however, it became fashionable for men to wear their hair short. Yes. Usually in curls or short strands. Women, meanwhile, had long hair held together by nets, pins and bands. The classical period saw the appearance of even more looks, like the Olympian hairstyle, which involved bounding the hair upwards in a way that was reminiscent of a burning flame. Huh. Similarly, there was also the melon-style bun, in which hair was tightened to form a braided crown, and a Greek bun with a high knot. Doesn't really say what that one has. I would imagine that's the... That's the melon bun? Well, I'm just going from an educated guess, but it's not very well educated.
Greek homes had kitchens where the family's meals were prepared. The Greeks did not often eat meat, except during special occasions like banquets or after sacrifices. They had mainly a grain-based diet, eating staples such as bread, porridge, or a barley cake called maza. They also occasionally ate poultry, fish, and other seafood, as well as fruits, vegetables, goat milk and cheese, and olive oil. Food was cooked on a tripod, or sometimes in a klibanos, which was a sort of mobile oven. Other cooking implements included braziers, mortars and pestles, a spit to hold food over a fire, platters, and frying pans. The family also used the kitchen to store food in containers called pithoi.
I see a lot of modern commodities that we have now that you think wouldn't be around then. According to Hippocrates, some Greeks ate 1 meal a day while others ate 2, and they were called greedy. The main meal was called the diphnon, or depthnon, that word, and was eaten in the evening, while the second possible meal was called the artisan. Ariston even, I even had to correct myself, and was normally eaten around noon. The diphon was made up of 3 parts, a cereal staple called a sitos, a main dish called an opson, and potos, otherwise known as wine. Ah yes, I feel like a glass of potos myself. The opson usually consisted even of meat or fish, while the wine was served with desserts like dried fruits, nuts and cakes. The Greek diet was based on the Mediterranean triad, grains, grapes and olives. Unlike today of fat, and booze. So it's a fairly healthy diet. Though you could put that down to it's all they could have. Or yeah, all they could find.
Symposia were major social institutions in Greece. They were drinking parties held exclusively for men. The party took place in the men's section of the house, the andron, where residents and guests reclined on special couches called klinai. Food was served on low tables set in front of the couches, while wine was placed in a crater in the center of the room. During a symposium, men drank, sang, had philosophical discussions, and played games like kotobos. Musicians, dancers, and even courtesans were often welcomed to attend as well. However, wives and daughters were always excluded.
And that actual cup was shown in a lecture where we talked about Symposium. And I learned quite a bit more. If it's not mentioned in this, I'll probably mention it here. The most popular party game at Symposia was the Kotobos, a game consisting of flicking an almost empty wine cup to project the remainder of the wine at a specific target. Yeah, they did mention this one. The target was usually a terracotta vessel, either floating in a bowl of water or balanced on a stand, and the objective of the game was to use the wine dregs to sink the vessel or knock it down. Another popular symposium game involved the singing of scholia. Scholia were drinking songs sung by symposiasts in turns. Participants even would pass along a sprig of laurel or myrtle. Whoever held the sprig would start singing, then pass it suddenly to another person who would do their best to continue the song. Oh, we should try that, that'd be funny. Obviously, like they said, there was courtesans, so you can imagine what else went on. Obviously, I think they didn't want to include it in this because obviously I think they just didn't want to show any explicit material like that. But you can find symposium. Well, probably wasn't used at symposia, though you never know. You can find pottery with scenes that would depict symposia, and it's of like people basically having sex. There's like, you know, it's everything we're talking about. Like, you've got people having anal sex, you've got people giving oral sex, you've got the one that made me laugh in particular, and obviously if you're a child watching this, or if you're a parent with a child, don't watch my commentary versions. Watch the originals. But there was a scene of a man, you know, helping himself whilst a bunch of people were having a group sex on the floor. And it was quite funny because it looked like he was giving the guy on top a high five. It was really weird. If any, obviously, adult audiences, if you do look some of them up, they're very entertaining, is what I'd call it. Just because you don't think that they'd be doing that, or they would ever depict that sort of thing, but it was everywhere, and it was freaking funny. I mean, there was other darker stuff that went on, but I'm not going to go into that because that was probably too dark. Other than what people say in the comments is not my control. Anyway.
The Pyrgos, or upper stories, was the women's quarter of the house, where they could pursue their activities and observe the city without being seen themselves. The rooftops were also used in a special rite called the Adonia, a private celebration held in honor of Adonis, which was reserved for women. At the beginning of spring, women filled terracotta pots with soil and lettuce seeds, then climbed a ladder to place the pots on the rooftop. These pots served as the women's very own Gardens of Adonis.
The Adonia festival was linked closely to the myth of Adonis, a mortal who was beloved by the goddess Aphrodite. After incurring Artemis's wrath, Adonis was killed by a boar, and from his blood spilled blood-bloom flowers. The commemoration of Adonis's tragic death was central to the Adonian celebration. The participating women danced, sang, and ritually mourned Adonis by setting pots of plants on the rooftops and quickly germinated and withered. Because of this, the phrase Gardens of Adonis were often used proverbially by Greeks to describe something trivial and wasteful. After the rooftop ceremony, the women descended into the streets for a funeral procession. When the procession was over, they buried small statues of the gods, then celebrated by drinking wine and playing games. So they had their own sort of version of it, I suppose.
I hope you now have a better understanding of the routines and home life of the Greek people. What would you like to do next?
Well, gotta quiz me. So quiz me.
Let's start with a simple question. Which group of people celebrated the Adonia?
I didn't actually. Sorry, I wasn't paying
Which
attention.
group of people
Oh,
celebrated the Adonia?
I love if you keep asking, she just gets more
Correct.
annoyed each time.
The Adonia was celebrated by women of all stations. Let's move on to the next question. Which of the following was known as the protector of the household? Yes, Zeus Herkios protected
That was a
the
slight
household,
guess, and it was Zeus.
and an altar to the god usually stood in the center of the house's courtyard.
It's kind of strange that they have,
On
like...
to the final question. Which of the following was not located in the bathroom? Correct. But Livanos was a mobile oven usually found in the kitchen. It seems you really know your
Very
way
strange how
around
they
Greek
have...
homes. Well done.
They've got their gods, and then it seems these gods have other versions of themselves for a specific task.
Farewell, wanderer, and thank you for visiting my city.
Yeah, discovery sites, that'll be a different thing we'll do entirely. There's already some over there, and obviously it would be easier just to go through them, but I'd prefer to just sort of do those once we're done here. Or maybe halfway through, we'll get through these first 3, and then we'll do the others. Anyway, next tour. Booze, my favourite. Waiting for the loading time. Really wish they weren't so long. Something tells me it's deconstructing the world and then loading it all up again. Which is rather daft. Oh god, not you. Alright.
Ah, my friend! How fortuitous to run into you in this most intoxicating place! I'd offer you a drink, but for some reason the workers won't let me borrow any of their wine. Cheapskates. You know, I once started my own wine business on Kos. It hit a bit of a snag when my investors, 3 brothers calling themselves the Cerberus, suddenly lost faith in me. But after they had a tragic run-in with a bloodthirsty Misthios, I was able to land on my feet. From then on, the streets of Kos overflowed with wine, and my purse overflowed with drachmi. Very sad about the Cerberus, though.
I'm so sad my hand keeps clipping through my toker sash.
As you can
He's nice.
tell by all the grapes, this is one of Greece's
Oh, you don't
many
like Marcus.
vineyards. Wine was an essential part of Greek culture.
He's a horrible, well, not a horrible character, just a bit of an arsehole in the game. And his voice is just clearly meant to be... Is he trying to be Borat?
I promise I'll meet you at the end of your visit, my friend. See you soon.
I tell you, it's nice. This is my vineyard. This vineyard is pain in my asshole.
Winemaking dates back to the 4th or 3rd millennium BCE. It became widespread in Greece during the Bronze Age, and within centuries the Greeks had refined it further. The first step in the process was always harvesting, where grapes grown on rows of vines were collected by vineyard workers. According to Homer, harvesting was often accompanied by music to give it a more festive atmosphere. Ancient Greek wine mainly came in 3 different varieties: Osteros, Glucation, and Autokratos. It could be flavored with spices, herbs, resin, and even perfume. It was also much stronger than modern wine, with an alcohol percentage of approximately 16%. Because of this, the drink was mixed with water to make it more palatable.
And also so they can get massively drunk after one sip. The god Dionysus was believed to have introduced wine to mortals. Just rocked up one day and was like, hey guys, got some good stuff here. As a result, there were many celebrations and festivals dedicated to Dionysus, including the Anestria, an Athenian festival that marked the broaching of a new wine from the previous summer. The Anestria took place over 3 days. The first day was the Pythagoreia jar opening. As its name implied, it was dedicated to opening new wine jars and offering libations to Dionysus. The second day, Chaos jugs, included jovial events like the drinking contests, but also a solemn ceremony where the wife of the Archon would be wedded to Dionysus. Lucky bastard. The third day was called Kritioi. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. Pots. So literally it's jars, jugs, pots, in reference to the pots that contain the day's meals. The Ethestria was mostly light-hearted, but it had a dark side as well. Everything does. The Chaos, in particular, was viewed as a day of ill omen, when ghosts from the underworld would appear to haunt the living, because you have all the booze. On this day, people allegedly chewed leaves of whitethorn and smeared tar on their doors to protect themselves from the wrath of the dead. I mean, yeah, you don't want to be enjoying a nice cup of the old wine, and then your great-great-grandfather knocks on the door and is like, "Where's mine?"
Grapes were dried to maximize the wine's sweetness and prevent it from turning into vinegar. In most vineyards, the drying process involved laying the grapes out on the ground under the heat of the sun, then covering them at night to protect them from accumulating dew. According to Hesiod's poem, Works and Days, the ideal time to dry grapes was 10 days and 10 nights. When they were finally completely dried, the grapes were collected in jars, just as they are today.
I'd imagine not much of it's changed. Just mechanical now. The Greeks used different types of grapes to produce different kinds of wine. According to Julius Pollux in his Onomaskion, or his book, there were 28 varieties of grapes, and they were often named after their place of origin or the method of their production. So, you know, if you think you see books today with people writing just about wine, what happened then? And he was talking about grapes. The Biblia variety of grapes produced a wine called the Biblianos. The Biblianos enjoyed... it's going to be multiple attempts at me trying to say it. Enjoyed a great reputation among wine lovers and even appears in Euripides' tragedy Ion during a scene set at a luxurious symposium. The dark-coloured Pramnia grape variety, meanwhile, was used for the Pramios wine. An appreciated black vintage produced in Ikara and Smyrna. Smyrna. We'll go with that one. The Pramnios wine was prestigious enough to have been drunk by the heroes of the Iliad and the Odyssey. So essentially, it is your King Goblin in your Hobgoblin variety. Maybe. Give it a beer reference. Anyway. On the other hand of the spectrum were the Ptithios or the Scythia. White grapes from Ionia that produced a very sweet wine known today as Liasto. So you had normal wine, white wine, dead wine, black wine. Wouldn't mind trying some of that.
The Greeks had many methods for crushing the harvested grapes. The most common technique was to use a lenos, a large treading vat where workers stomped on grapes with their feet. Alternatively, the Greeks sometimes crushed the grapes by hand using a strainer, mashed them with a mortar and pestle, or squeezed them using a tool called a sack press.
Wine had many uses in Greek culture. The liquid was very important for symposia, communal drinking parties reserved exclusively for men, as we learned earlier. During a symposium, a kreta, mixing bowl at the centre of the room, was used to mix water and wine together. Once diluted, it was shared amongst the party guests, who drank it from individual cups. Wine played a part in libations to the gods and at funerals. Furthermore, it could be mixed with certain aphrodisiac or hypnotic properties to induce feelings like arousal or sleepiness. So, yeah, I'm not even going to mention what I think that could be. Surprisingly, wine was also used as medical treatment for the sick, and women suffered gynecological problems were sometimes prescribed the drink. I mean, don't we all just solve our problems with alcohol? Well, most of us. Dioscorides even described two types of wine that would supposedly abort fetuses. And on that note, carry on.
After the grapes were pressed, the resulting juice was poured into large containers called pithoi, where it fermented. Once fully fermented, the wine was filtered through an ethmos or sac, which separated it from the residual yeast called lees. The wine was then placed in a special storage room. The room was half buried to keep it dry and maintain a consistent temperature of 15 degrees Celsius. These measures ensured the wine wouldn't lose any of its quality before being shipped to market.
Wine from Thassos was considered to be one of the highest quality Greek wines, and was consequently produced on a large scale to be exported to foreign markets. Well, that makes sense. The Hippocratic treatise on disease even listed Thasian wine among refreshing beverages that aided patients suffering from hot flushes. In Athens and the rest of Greece, Thasian wine was at the high end of the quality spectrum. It's like a fine vintage. Archaeological evidence of Thasian amphoras has turned up in places like Athens, Amphipolis, Pella, Egypt, and other areas around the Black Sea. So, yeah, that's like the equivalent of Creek Valley, or I'm not really a wine person. Look, the top brand. Many of these amphoras were labelled with the name of the people involved in the production of the container, such as potters, workshop owners, or inspectors dedicated to ensuring the quality of the jars. These stamps also helped authenticate the origin of the wine. And yeah, I wish we could all have that on our things.
When the wine was ready to ship, it was poured into storage containers called amphoras. These were smaller than pithoi, which made them easier to ship and display in crowded marketplaces. However, that doesn't mean transporting wine was always a safe endeavor. Sometimes ships carrying amphoras as cargo would be wrecked before making it to their destination, losing hundreds of bottles of wine to the sea.
Athens was home to many taverns, and the establishment's managers were often mocked by Aristophanes, however you want to say it, the comic poet. What did he write? I've not read apart from Lysistrata, and I don't think I read that much of it. I don't know if he's ever. I wonder what kind of jokes he made. I suppose it's like, oh, your wine's rubbish, mate. The taverns were called Keplion, or Taverna, and sold wine, vinegar, and sometimes sweets and bar snacks, so your typical pub. After a wine amphora was opened, the liquid was poured into a crater, mixed in bowl to decant. You got to decant it for like 4 hours! It could also be cooled by pouring it into a wine cooler called a psychter first, then placing the psychter into a crater filled with cold water. So you can't just slosh it into a glass and have a cheeky chug-a-lug. When it was ready to be served, the wine was transferred to jugs called, Orychioi. I'm going to go with that one. And was drunk in individual cups like Kilichis or Canthrioi. In Athens, taverns flourished in the south-east corner of the Agora, according to numerous amphoras, drinking cups, mixing bowls, and cookware that have been found in the area. Similar archaeological evidence has also been found in the south corner of Corinth's Agora, suggesting there were taverns there as well. I mean, if there's pubs everywhere, you can imagine there's probably a tavern everywhere. Everyone get drunk.
My friend, are you drunk with knowledge? I hope you enjoyed
No, I'm
yourself
just drunk.
learning about all the picking, stomping, and bottling that goes into making Greece's favorite beverage. Maybe if my customers understood how hard winemaking was, they'd agree more with my perfectly reasonable prices. But let's talk about something else, yes? What else can I do for you? You want your intelligence tested? Well, let me tell you, my friend, no one is more qualified for that task than me.
That's
Let's
what I'm
get
afraid of.
started. What container was used to ship wine to the market? Yes, wine was stored in amphoras during its long journey to market. Here's another question. Which of the following wasn't a type of wine variety? Correct! Thassos was an
Had to
island
think there.
famous for its vineyards. Not a specific type of wine. Just one more question to go, my friend. Which part of the winemaking process created the grape juice necessary for wine? That's the one. The harvested grapes were pressed in a linos, often by the feet of vineyard workers. Just try not to think about that last part whenever you have a cup of wine. You know your wine. You're as good with facts as I am with money, and that's really saying something.
Yeah. I'm gonna leave you now before I want to strangle you.
If you say so, my friend, I hope we see each other again soon.
Unfortunately, we will. Right then, what's the next one on the list? Life of a Greek woman. Gotta travel around, gotta travel around. Bird.
Welcome to Corinth, Wanderer. I have a special visit planned for you today. It's an intimate, informative look into the daily lives of Greek women. It's amazing what women could accomplish while men spend all day trying to out-debate each other at assembly meetings. Their work should be far more appreciated on the whole, but we're going to acknowledge that now. Corinth was one of the largest cities in ancient Greece. It had an estimated population of 90,000 in my times, and much of that population was made up of women. This tour will shine a light on those women and look at how they lived on a day-to-day basis. Look for me when you're done with your visit, and we can discuss things further.
Young girls growing up in ancient Greek cities were usually raised by a nurse. They mostly stayed in the women's quarters of the house, the gunaikon, where they spent their time spinning threads and weaving. While there is not much historical evidence of young girls at play, especially compared to boys, it was still known to happen. For example, an ancient terracotta group depicts two girls playing ephedrismos. This was a competition to see who could strike an upright rock from afar using a pebble or ball. The game's loser had to close their eyes and carry the victor until they managed to touch the same rock with their hands.
Sounds pleasant. As did that. Oh,
They mostly
we've heard it. Some of them look so depressed. It's estimated that the area that would eventually be known as Corinth was inhabited as early as the Neolithic period, around 6500 BCE. During the Classical period, Corinth was a rival to both Athens and Thebes because of its control of the Isthmus of Corinth. However, under Alexander the Great and his successors, Corinth, along with many other Greek cities, lost its autonomy. In 146 BCE, Romans under the command of Lucius Mummius besieged Corinth. Mummy killed all of the male inhabitants and sold the women and children into slavery, then burned the city down. What a nice man. The Romans built a city in Corinth's place in 44 BCE, which they later made the provincial capital of Greece. Still, thanks for burning things down, mummy. Mimimius.
For a young Greek woman, marriage was the culmination of their induction into society. The average life expectancy for women was about 40 years, so most marriages took place when the bride was 14 or 15 years old. The marriage did not require her consent either. Instead, she was passed on from the protection of her father to that of her husband. Married women were not technically citizens at the time, and lacked the rights that came with official citizenship. However, they did receive a dowry that only they were allowed to spend, but in the event of a failed marriage, the dowry was returned to the bride's father. After the marriage was consummated, the woman's status changed from being a maiden to a bride. She remained a bride until the birth of her first child, wherein she officially became a woman.
A male citizen's parents usually lived in his house, along with his wife and children. So I just looked at the pot. However, ancient households in Athens and Corinth were normally not composed of extensive families. The man's kind of looking at this boy like... Is that how fucking small he is? Like, Jesus. Or it's that kind of thing with, here is your son, and he's like, you what? Daddy? No. It's quite fun to look at Greek pottery, just because you can just... There's the serious interpretation and the silly one.
Women living in ancient Greek cities were essentially forbidden from participating in political life, and most aspects of their lives were controlled by men. Their most important responsibilities were running the household and giving birth to children, preferably boys. Most of the time, women's excursions outside of the house were limited to visiting other female neighbors, as per custom. The few exceptions to this strict rule were weddings, funerals, and religious festivals involving women in prominent public roles.
Ancient Greek men dedicated most of their time to public life, but Greek home life was dominated by women. An Athenian or Corinthian wife was in charge of the household and divided her time between spinning, weaving, and sewing family garments. Meanwhile, duties like food preparation and child-rearing were usually performed by women slaves. However, if a family was too poor to afford many slaves, the wife took on those responsibilities. And again, I kind of want to be like, this is where you put the thing! You put it in the pot! You mix it all up! And it's like, okay, yeah, good. Do you get it? Or maybe she's dropped something and she's like, no!
Making textiles was the main occupation of most Greek women. It was a woman's responsibility to manufacture clothing for each of her family members, as well as to weave other household textiles. Women with exceptional weaving skills were believed to make excellent wives, and weaving in general was seen as a very attractive quality. For example, Homer describes Odysseus' devoted wife Penelope as spending most of her days weaving at the loom. Similarly, many Greek vases depicting women weaving were combined with images of a woman holding a veil, which was seen as the symbol of a bride.
So what, you just marry a woman and then she just has to make a... I don't feel about that. Some evidence of ancient weaving activities comes from an archaic black figure terracotta lichios vessel. In other words, great big jug. The vessel depicts women weighing wool, spinning, working on an upright loom and folding finished garments. What is the one we're looking at, I'm assuming? It looks like that. Plus it looks very archaic. 5:30. Oh, okay. Yeah. Besides weaving, another daily activity in ancient Greece was fetching water from the local fountain house. This activity gave women the opportunity to socialise outside of their homes. Women were also responsible for visiting the tombs of family members. Typically, they brought offerings and tied sashes around the grave steles. Women could attend public speeches and visit certain sanctuaries, but only if they were accompanied by men. Oh, the joys!
Ancient Greek women cooked in their house's kitchen area. However, since their cooking equipment was small and portable, they also sometimes prepared meals in the central courtyard. This was also where women performed other domestic activities. These activities were rarely seen by visiting men or passers-by, because the architecture of classical Greek houses facilitated the social norm that women should never be seen at work.
Many Greek art depictions of women preparing food suggest that cooking was occasionally done in the courtyard, where they enjoyed fresh air. However, women mostly cooked in kitchen complexes located at the back of the house, where they would not be seen by others. What the frick? We don't want to see how the sausage is made. Maybe that's why.
The historian Strabo relays that the Temple of Aphrodite was one of Corinth's most famous landmarks. This was largely due to the temple's female patrons. These hetairai, as they were called, were donated to the goddess by both men and women. According to Strabo, the Temple of Aphrodite contributed greatly to Corinth's wealth. The hetairai were the temple's main attraction, and many visitors came to Corinth in search of their company, for which they spent frequently and frivolously.
Naughty people. In Athens, the legendary lawmaker Solon was credited with creating state brothels with regulated prices. Brothels employed men and women of all ages and were visited by a predominantly male clientele. And that's some lovely artwork there. I did like the artwork, I will admit. Right then.
Hello again, Wanderer. I hope your visit was an interesting one. Greek women lived very restricted lives compared to men, but throughout it all, they held on to their strength and dignity. Is there anything else you'd like to do?
Quiz me!
Feeling up for a test? Excellent. Let's begin with an easier question. What was the name of the women's quarters in a Greek home?
She didn't hit. Again, I'm trying to do other things.
In a Greek home?
Oh,
Correct. The Gynekon was where young girls
because
spent
you just
their
think
days
gynecology.
weaving and spinning threads.
Horrible as
On
that
to the
sounds.
next question. The Corinthian temple said to employ the Hetera was dedicated to which god? Correct. Aphrodite was the goddess of love and passion, so it's only fitting her temple served such an amorous purpose. We're almost done. Just one more question. What was the name of Odysseus' wife? Yes, Penelope was Odysseus' loyal wife, who kept at her weaving while waiting for her husband to return from war. You passed the test, Wanderer. Congratulations.
Time very much.
Then farewell, wanderer, and thank you for visiting this great place.
Bronze.
Welcome to Argos, traveler. My name is Herodotus, and I am a traveler from Hyrcanassus. I retrace the cause of various events, such as wars and great calamities. I describe what I see, and record what I'm told, all with the aim of providing a better understanding of why these things occur. Look for me to introduce you to many sites. I have always admired the dedication of Greek metalworkers. Without them, we would not have the inspiring monuments that stir the hearts of Greek citizens everywhere.
Again, you got a good point. They're quite nice.
This is Argos, one of the oldest cities in Greece. The Argives were an ingenious people, famous for innovations in areas like military tactics. However, what they were most renowned for was their metallurgic artistry, especially with bronze. I hope you enjoy yourself. Look for me at the end of your visit.
Bronze.
The area that would become Argos was inhabited as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, but it was in the 7th century BCE that it officially became a city-state. One of Argos's major pillars was its metallurgical industry. As far back as the 8th century BCE, the city was famed for making products like long dress pins and tripod cauldrons, as well as impeccable body armor. In addition to their technical excellence, the Argives were also creative, as seen in their masterful bronze sculpting, which became prominent in the city during the 6th and 5th century BCE.
Archaeologists have discovered a unique bronze set of armour consisting of a helmet and a corselet in a warrior's tomb at Argos. The bell-shaped corselet is the earliest known piece of body armour from Iron Age Greece. The corselet and helmet display both the technical excellence and general sculpting skills Argos was known for. Lot of bronze. They call it the Bronze Town. Also the name of a not really a supermarket, is it? A chain of stores. Lithuanian, absolute genius.
Bronze is an alloy composed of 90% copper and 10% tin. Because of this, copper and tin needed to be smelted and combined. to create the material needed for sculpting. After the bronze alloy was formed, it was melted in special furnaces. They required a tremendous amount of fuel, and were usually supplied with charcoal, made from specific types of wood. It's possible they were also coated with a protective lining of clay, which would have been sensible given the melting point of bronze is approximately 950 degrees Celsius. Once the bronze was melted and collected, the furnaces were dismantled and dumped.
No such thing as reuse then. Black bronze is a modern term for ancient bronze artifacts with a fine black patina. Examples of black bronze include a special class of prestigious but non-functional Mycenaean bronze daggers that date back to the 2nd millennium BCE. The daggers were decorated with black inlay and gold and silver foil using a technique called painting in metal. Corinthian bronze, meanwhile, was the name given to copper alloys that were depletion gilded to acquire a golden surface hue. According to legend, Corinthian bronze was originally created by accident during the burning of Corinth in 1146 BCE, which melted the city's immense quantities of gold, silver, and copper together. So everyone was like, "God damn, my house is burned down, but ooh, copper and bronze." However, Pliny doubted the authenticity of this story. Yeah, I think people would probably not think much about it. They'd be more like, damn, where I'm going to live now. Because most of the artists who worked with Corinthian bronze lived long before the 2nd century BCE. Ah, that as well.
In the 8th century BCE, most small-scale statues were molded using a complicated and lengthy method called solid lost wax casting. From the 7th century BCE onwards, metalworkers adopted the more efficient hollow lost wax casting. At its core, this process involved using sculpting models from wax, making molds over these models, then filling the molds with bronze to produce the desired shapes. The process was advantageous because it saved on materials, produced lighter statues, and reduced the chance of possible defects.
Lost wax casting was one of the main techniques used in ancient jewellery making, along with hammering, filigree, and granulation. The technique was used to manufacture finger rings, earrings, bracelets, and dress pins. Pretty much a standard industry then. Mind you, it must have made them a load of money, so why not?
Once all the pieces of the sculpture were molded, they were welded together and subjected to the cold working process. This process involved repairing the sculpture's flaws by filling any holes and cracks with specifically measured bronze patches. Afterwards, the sculpture was scraped, chiseled, and polished until it was deemed satisfactory. Decorative details like hair, eyebrows, and mustaches were added with the use of a sharp tool. Eyes, which could be inset with ivory, glass, or silver, were attached to their sockets using a resinous kind of glue. Teeth and fingernails were inlaid with silver, and lips and nipples with copper. These small touches added color and contributed to the sculpture's lifelike appearance.
Copper nipples, copper nipples. Bronze is subject to corrosion from oxidation, that's the word, and weather. As a result, over time, the colour of its surface turns green, so that's how you know you've got copper. However, once a copper oxide layer is formed, the underlying metal is protected from further erosion or weathering. This superficial protective layer is called the patina and can develop naturally or artificially. The patina on most ancient Greek bronze statues is natural. Its colour usually depends on the composition of the soil where the statues were found buried, or if the sea from which they were recovered. For example, the light green patina on the statue of Zeus, recovered from Dodona, is a result of composition of the local soil. Fair enough. No, I'm aware of copperization. I've seen many a copper version, like swords and things like that. Same with bronze swords.
Bronze sculptures have a long and varied history in Greece. During the geometric period of 900 to 700 BCE, the sculptures mainly depicted idealized heroes, charioteers, and horses, and most of them were dedicated to sanctuaries. The Orientalizing period followed in the 7th century BCE. During this time, Greeks began adopting sculpting techniques from the East, and the depicted statues expanded to include mythological creatures like griffins and sphinxes. The Archaic period saw statues that reflected a better understanding of human anatomy, which eventually culminated in the realistic and powerful human sculptures of the Hellenistic period.
The Odyssey bronzes are 2 life-size statues that were pulled out of the sea near Calabria, Italy, in 1972. The statues date back to the 5th century BCE and display several of the hallmarks of classical Greek sculptures in terms of order, proportionality, harmony, and symmetry. The statues depict naked warriors of a mature age as indicated by the beards and the faces. However, their bodies are robust, vigorous, and muscular. Based on their poses, at one point each of them held a shield with their left hand and either a spear or sword in their right. While the statues were probably sculptured in the same workshop, inquiries into the identity of their sculptor remains inconclusive. No one left a signature on the bot cheek. Ah, yes. Polycletus referred to work with bronze in his... Oh god, these are actually quite small. With bronze and lost wax casting technique as a sculpture. His known work, titled Canon, described the perfect system proportions for each part of the body. They pop up, I'll read them.
Argos was the home of Polykleitos, one of the most famous sculptors in ancient Greece. His works, like the Doryphorus and Diadomenos, as well as his treatise on sculpting called the Canon, had a massive impact on the art as a whole, particularly in regards to ideal body proportions. Sadly, the original versions of Polykleitos' sculptures have been lost, along with most bronze statues from antiquity. As time went on, many bronze statues were melted down to be recycled in things like weapons, ammunition, and even church bells. Because of this, marble copies from the Roman period are our best evidence of the masterpieces of Greek sculpture.
Greek sculpting culminated during the classical period, which saw fundamental changes in both the style and function of sculpting as an art form. The main characteristics of classical statuary were increased accuracy of anatomy and realistic stances, although I don't know if anyone stands like that with their balls out. Poses became more naturalistic as sculptures began depicting real people. The tensile strength and lighter weight of hollow cast bronze statuary played the important part in these developments, as the material allowed for many different open poses without needing the struts and bridges required in marble sculpting.
I see you have completed your tour. I trust you have a new appreciation for Greek sculptures, after learning of the heart and soul that was poured into each step of their creation. Now, what else would you like to do? Let us dive right in. Here is your first question. Which era of sculpting came first? Correct. The geometric period lasted from 900 to 700 BCE, and mostly featured small-scale statues and statuettes of heroes and horses. On to the second question. Bronze was an alloy composed of which two metals? Yes. To get the bronze required for sculpting, metal workers first needed to smelt copper and tin. One last question for you. which renowned sculptor was a native of Argos. Yes, Polyklitos was based in Argos and had an enormous impact on the art of sculpting. You've done well, traveler. Your knowledge of metalwork is astounding.
I mean, I wouldn't have had to make one.
Then, farewell.
As in, actually get the stuff
May we meet again soon.
to make it, and you know what I mean. I can vaguely follow what I've been told. Perfume. Waiting for the thing to load. Hurry up now, don't want to get bored. I will enjoy you.
My friend, I see you followed your nose to this lovely perfumery, perfume yard, perfactory? Yes, let's go
He's
in
nice.
perfactory. A word of advice from a former perfume peddler. Never start your sales pitch with, "You smell like you could use some perfume." It has a surprisingly low success rate. This sensuous little island is where perfume was produced. Your nostrils are in for a treat, unless you're allergic, in which case I could sell you a wonderful remedy for a very reasonable price. No? Okay then. I'll check in on you at the end of your visit. See you soon, my friend.
Perfume-making techniques were invented and perfected in Mesopotamia and Egypt, beginning in the 4th millennium BCE. By the time of the Mycenaean era, perfume played an important role in the Greek economy. Mostly reserved for kings, priests, and aristocrats in the beginning, it later became more widely available during the classical and Hellenistic periods. Greeks used perfume for more than just personal cosmetics. It also had sacred uses. For example, cults would sometimes anoint their god's statue with perfume, and it was also used during rituals like weddings and funerals. Food and wine could also be scented with perfume to add to a meal's presentation. The art of making perfume was part of medicine and pharmacology, and physicians devoted entire books listing the best perfume recipes.
Don't mix poo. Get the worst one. Many myths involve fragrances and perfumes, like the story of Lynx. One story tells of Phaon, a ferryman from Lesbos, who gave a free ride to an old woman revealed to be Aphrodite in disguise. As a reward for his kindness, Aphrodite gave Phaon a special rejuvenating ointment that, when used, would turn him into the most beautiful man alive. Insert current sexiest man alive winner here. In another story, when Aphrodite wept over the loss of her love Adonis, the fragrant purple anemone flower sprang forth from either her tears or Adonis's blood. Nice. I want to put some blood in my perfume, just rub it in there.
Perfume is made up of two main components. A greasy substance, called an excipient, like vegetable oil or animal fat, and an odorous substance, such as flowers and plants. For ancient Greeks, the most common excipient was olive oil. According to Theophrastus, however, the most valuable oils were those extracted from nuts in the Syrian and Egyptian deserts. The odorous ingredient could be taken from a variety of sources. These include flowers like roses or lilies, herbs like oregano, spices like saffron, resins like amber, and leaves from plants. Some fragrances were also imported from outside of Greece, like Indian cinnamon and Syrian frankincense. These exotic scents were considered exceptionally precious.
Perfumes were named after either their contents, their place of origin, or their inventor. Some, like rose perfume, were pure oils, but most were compound ointments made up of many, many materials, though these could still be named after their main ingredient. The perfume called Pantheneum, close enough, came from Athens, while the perfume called Medincia was named after the main day's Egyptian region of Egypt. You get what I mean. Ephesus perfumery, meanwhile, was held in many high esteem, especially the Megalion, named after its maker Megalos. Baccharis and Pasagadas was also very popular perfumes in classical Athens, but the origins of the names remain obscure, maybe because people can't pronounce them. Like me! And also the Narcissus plant. Gee, I wonder who that's named after.
Mixing scent into the fatty excipient was called enfleurage, of which there were two methods. If the flower being used for the scent was fragile, the preferred method of extraction was cold enfleurage, which required an oil-soaked cloth. First, the cloth was rubbed against the flower's petals, saturating the oil with the scent. Then, the cloth was pressed to wring out the scented oil. Hot enfleurage involved heating the excipient before mixing in the scented substance.
That sounds more sensible than rubbing the stuff on the oil. Fucking Jesus. Oh God, I'm stuck in this pot! And the head on top's like, whoa, what's going on here? In ancient Greece, perfumers were called, oh God, myrispoi. I'm going to put my glasses back on. I was getting a bit of a headache and I thought it was the glasses, but at least I can actually read the damn things. Or maripoiloi. Perfume making was considered to be a vile job, thus the public held them in very low esteem. The Athenian statesman Solon even promoted a law in the 6th century BCE that forbade men from selling perfume, in an effort to prevent men from engaging in activities deemed more appropriate for women. Nevertheless, perfumers had ties to Greece's upper classes, though the work was lucrative, as the wealthy were always willing to spend large sums of exotic aromas. Some perfumers made so much money that they were able to turn their perfumeries into opulent places of business, and maybe even taverns, who knows. God, I thought of the light.
The hot enfleurage process consisted of heating and distillation. After the scented ingredients were dipped into heated oil, the mixture was then filtered before being pressed and decanted. Once the mixture was complete, spices, coloring agents and fixatives were added, along with preservatives to prevent the perfume from spoiling. Finally, the liquid was hermetically sealed in bottles, ready to be shipped to market.
Some of those look nice. I think, yeah, some of those bottles look nice. Eye-catching, if you were. The perfumer's workshop was hardly distinguishable from an ancient Greek kitchen. It was full of fireplaces and pots, mortars to grind ingredients, and funnels to help fill perfume bottles. The workshops were usually situated in or around the city's agora. According to both archaeological evidence and literary testimonies, the island of Delos once had a large perfume industry. The island was home to many different types of people, including a Jewish community from Babylon and Sabians from Arabia, and also very active in the spice trade. These factors, along with others, most likely provided Delos with a variety of ingredients and scents for perfumes. That would make sense.
Perfume was usually bottled in ceramic or glass flasks, but more luxurious fragrances were contained in ornamented and painted flasks. Lekythoi and alabastra were elegant bottles designed for women, while arabaloi were used by athletes. It was common for the bottle's craftsmen to brand them, to prevent frauds and knockoffs. Perfume shops were usually located in city centers, befitting of their importance. In addition to selling perfume, they were also sometimes used as meeting places. For example, the perfume shops near Athens' Agora were frequented every morning by the city's youth.
Perfuming was common at Greek parties and other special occasions. During special drinking parties known as symposia, Jesus Christ, they keep thinking we don't know what that is yet. I suppose it's just in the case, because you can do these tours in any order. Anyway, men anointed their heads with perfume, just a little drop. They believed this enabled them to drink more wine without feeling any of the ill effects of drunkenness. Experiment, shall we? Spray, like get some lotion, some Nivea, just rub it on top of your head. Immune to hangovers. They also used aromatics like honey and myrrh to improve the taste of the wine. Why would you put... Oh no, frankincense is the other one, isn't it? Myrrh's not that. Isn't it that one? I don't know. Because one's meant to be for funerary preparation. I think it's frankincense. I was thinking, why would you want to put funerary herbs in your perfume, or your wine in this case? Similarly, perfume played an important role in wedding ceremonies. Perfume bottles were included in the gifts the bride received the day after the wedding, and a pleasing scent was the sign of a good future for the couple. She rocked up smelling a bit rough. We thought we'd get her something nice. Don't want to marry a stinky Charlotte. Or a stinky Stephanie.
The main purpose of perfume was to attract members of both the opposite and the same sex. We can trace this practice back to a scene in the Iliad, where Hera used perfume to seduce Zeus. Similarly, hymns about goddesses like Demeter and Aphrodite always mention their pleasant smell, further solidifying the belief that scent and seduction went hand in hand. However,
I mean, I suppose we all like people who smell nice.
Social status. Athletes covered themselves in perfumed oils during their training and at symposia, and citizens were judged based on how anointed, shiny, and
I don't know about
perfumed
how I
their
smell. No
bodies
one's ever
were.
commented on it. I do wash and stuff, so I don't think I'm that bad. Maybe that's why they didn't comment on it. And now I won't comment on it. Anyway. During the classical period, perfumes became more affordable for the majority of citizens. While exotic and precious perfumes were still expensive, not surprising, there were also cheaper varieties made from mostly local ingredients. As a result, the hierarchy of perfumes was created based on rarity of ingredients and complexity of production. City women distinguished themselves from country women by the amount of money they spent on perfumes, not much different from today. Some men, meanwhile, were against the idea of perfume altogether, and believed its use was a sin of effeminacy. Oh, okay. Toxic masculinity at work. Notably, the famous philosopher Socrates refused to use perfume, believing it was only fit for women. I mean, even today the marketing does I mean, you do have the perfumes that have perfume for men, perfume for women. But even so, when you look at marketing today, it's predominantly women. So, I don't agree with that. I think anyone can wear it. I think it's that personal preference. As long as I smell nice, I don't care.
Hello again, my friend. I hope you see now how important perfume was, not only for aesthetic purposes, but for Greek social hierarchy. I wouldn't charge so much for my own bottles if I didn't know the value of what I was selling. What else can Marcos do for you?
See that cliff? Go and have a look at it.
Good idea. Let's start with an easy question. Which of the following is an example of an excipient? Yes, olive oil makes a great excipient, and dressing, and medicine. Honestly, we pour that stuff on everything, including ourselves. And question 2, what is enfleurage? correct. Enfleurage involved mixing the perfume scent into an excipient. We're almost done. Just one more question. In the Iliad, which goddess used perfume to seduce Zeus? Yes, Hera poured
Oh,
the saucy
Hermes
scent on
definitely did.
herself to get her husband's attention. You did it! You've completed the test.
Did it? I'm not recalled. Did it? It must have
If you say
worked.
so, but I have a feeling we'll run into each
Yeah,
other
but is that
again
before or
soon.
after they were married?
Farewell.
I need to read the Iliad properly. Oh god, here we go. The delightful minds. I hope you like dark, depressing things. Pardon me. Not that they talk much about it here, it's just more like, oh, it's a bit dark and people died. It's like, yeah, mining in general, people die. Don't know about you, but it's kind of a thing that happens. Hey.
Welcome to the silver mines of Lavrion.
Ginache in there.
The mines make me nervous. All those fumes can't be safe to inhale day in and day out.
And yet it won't make people stop.
The Lavrion silver mines were discovered between Torikos and Cape Suni.
I mean, she doesn't continue from that statement, so she clearly is just like, oh, it's horrible what's going on in there. Anyway, money.
Of the silver necessary to mint its currency. Because of this, the mines were invaluable to the city, and the resources they provided helped turn Athens into one of the most powerful states in Greece.
But at what
We
cost?
will meet again after you've seen what the mines have to offer. Farewell for now, wanderer.
Mining in general is never a safe nor pleasant experience. I've been down a coal mine, I know how it feels.
Silver mines were extremely rare in ancient Greece, which only increased their importance. Athens started exploiting
Never worked in
Lavrian
one, it was
silver mines at the end of the 6th
what we
century
usually go down and
BCE,
see, and even there you
and
get the
used its
idea.
metal to produce its currency. Production at the mines exploded around 485 BCE, when an especially rich vein was discovered. The mine's abundant silver made Athens one of the wealthiest cities in Greece. They also provided the resources necessary to build a fleet large enough to defeat the Persians at the Battle of Salamis. In short, the Lavrian mines played an integral part in the emergence of Athens as a Greek superpower.
Athens' coinage dates back to around 530 BCE. The abundant resources from the Laurian mines allowed the city to mint a prolific coinage renowned for its quality of its silver. Like modern currency, Athens' coins had different values and weights. The most struck denomination was the tetrachma, which weighed 17.2 milligrams, I'm assuming that means. Just me, I don't know my weights, and mathematics is my worst enemy. Anyway, the coin, as its name implies, was worth 4 tetras drachmae. Drachmae! I'll just say, it's worth about £4, mate. The smallest coins and the most commonly used in the aggro were the triobal, or the tribbles, the obol, and the hemobol. What? The 50p, 20p, and the 5p? I don't know. You can't really compare financial systems to each other because half of them don't make sense. Well, especially if it's an ancient one to a modern one, because it
Exploiting
definitely
the
makes sense.
mine's resources required a lot of labor. To meet this requirement and save on cost, Athens leased out mining concessions to its citizens, who had their slaves to do most of the work, alongside poor day laborers. In the 5th century BCE alone, there were anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000 people toiling in the mines of Lavrion. Together, the workers managed to produce an estimated 20 tons of silver per year.
Ancient Greeks extracted a number of different metals like gold, silver, copper, tin, lead, iron and mercury. The most precious metals, silver and gold, were appreciated for their quality and rarity. They were used to produce coins and also jewellery, other luxury objects, and even statues like the golden ivory statue of Athena Parthenos. Most metals were traded in the form of ingots. Well, there you go. Sell the lump, let the other buggers spend money creating the refining it.
Mining in Lavrion was a two-step process. First, the ore was extracted, and then it was refined. It took about 16 kilograms of raw ore to produce a single pure silver drachma of about 4 grams.
It was pure.
Recovered artifacts from the mines provide some insight into the specifics of the mining process. Galleries were dug to follow the veins of ore. They were small and did not offer much space for the workers. They were also hand-cut, and it's believed that it took whole days to dig only a few centimeters. Once the galleries finally reached the veins, the ore was extracted and then crushed on mortar stone to prepare it for washing.
During the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans occupied and fortified Decelea, cutting Athens off from important roads. The slaves in Laurion took advantage of this opportunity, and 20,000 of them fled the mines. Because of this, silver extraction in Laurion ceased. Don't particularly blame them. The closing of the Laurion mines had a significant impact on Athens' economy. Its treasury gradually emptied, and it was left with no funds to rebuild its fleet. Deprived of resources, Athens was forced to melt 2 gold statues of Athena Nike to strike gold coins. The city also produced bronze coins covered in a thin silver layer to imitate and replace its tetradrachmas, a move that was criticised by the comic playwright Aristophanes. Still want to read that then? He's like, oh, this piece of shit, fucking not having that, are we? Couldn't sell me more for one of them. Anyway, I don't know why he'd sound like that. In 404 BCE, when the Peloponnesian War was over, the mining of silver was virtually non-existent. It was only decades later, in 370 BC, that entrepreneurs started leasing mines again. However, when Alexander the Great obtained a large amount of Persian silver in his conquests, the price of silver dropped so much that the yield from its mines were no longer enough to cover their running costs. So basically, Alexander was like, oh mate, you don't need any anymore, look at all this crap I've bought back. I suppose that would have changed years later when that ran out. Out of my way!
Mine workers used washeries to help clean rock from the ore. The washing process required a large supply of water, but Lavrion was an infamously dry region. To compensate, cisterns were built in the mining area to collect and conserve seasonal rainwater. Once enough water had accumulated, workers poured it into wooden troughs containing rock and ore. The water's flow separated the lighter grains of rock from the heavier ore, which was caught in depressions at the bottom of the trough. The newly cleaned ore was collected for refinement, and the water was redirected back into a tank to be reused later.
Oh look, it's a scrubber's house. The concept of using water to separate ore from rock is still applied today by modern gold miners. I do want to visit the Laurion mines, I will say that. Long way to run, you gotta go around. Out of my way.
Once the ore was clean and dry, it was ready for smelting. Its purpose was to isolate the silver in the ore. To do this, the ore was placed in a conical furnace filled with combustible charcoal. Bellows pumped air into the furnace to control the temperature. Inside, the ore burned, emitting a toxic smoke that was evacuated through a chimney. Eventually, the silver alloy was separated from the slag and collected for the last step in the refinement process, cupellation. Cupellation removed any leftover lead from the silver. The smelted alloy was placed in a cupel, an absorbent bowl made of bone ashes. It was then put in a furnace, where it absorbed the lead and left only silver behind.
The furnace is used for smelting and See, I call it cupellation, but okay. Cupellation, then, required an enormous amount of fuel. Based on evidence from South American silver mines exploiting under similar conditions, it's estimated that the ancient Greek mines required 10 tons of charcoal to produce 1 ton of silver. Sweet Lord. Well, you imagine the heat must have been immense.
While the mines of Lavrion belonged to Athens, the city frequently leased them to private citizens, who exploited the site for anywhere from 3 to 10 years. These citizens enlisted slaves and poor day laborers to carry out most of the work. The workers had a very low life expectancy, about 3 to 5 years, due to the hazardous working conditions. The dangers they faced included toxic lead vapor in the air and lung-choking dust in the galleries. However, they were fed well enough to keep up their work, and their combined labor managed to produce an estimated 20 tons of silver a year.
Which I doubt I ever saw. The Athenian political Nikeos, once a politician even, once brought a Thracian slave named Cisaius for 1 talent, the equivalent of 6,000 drachmae, and 30 and 40 times more than the normal price of a slave. The reason for Cisaius' high price was that he was an expert in searching for and finding silver tunnels. Because of this, Nikeos installed Cisaius as the administrator of the 1,000 slaves he already had working at the Laurian silver mines. Nikeos' purchase paid off, and according to Lysias, the politician eventually accumulated a fortune of 100 talents from his mining business. Every time I hear that word in appliance to money, I just think of Life of Brian. A talent? That's more than it makes in a month. Spare a talent for old Slipper.
I hope you enjoyed your trip through the mines.
No.
We talk so much
Smelt of
Athens'
death.
glory, but we often forget the city's power was due to tremendous amounts of work. Work that often had a great human cost. What else would you like to do? Excellent. Let's begin. What was the last step in the silver refinement process?
Cupellation.
Yes, cupellation removed
She
any
says
remaining
cupellation.
lead, leaving only the silver behind. Now, for the second question. How did workers acquire water for the ore washing process?
They begged Poseidon for a well of infinite water.
Correct. The workers used cisterns to collect the seasonal rainwater. Now, the final question. Which famous battle did the mines help Athens win? Correct. The Athenians used silver from the mines to finance a massive fleet for the Battle of Salamis. It's clear your visit has taught you much. A job well done, Wanderer.
And that's what they call me.
Farewell, Wanderer. Best of luck on your journeys.
I suppose it's just a catch-all term because you can obviously play as various characters. Obviously, in between each of these, I will be switching the characters out just to make it more interesting. Not long left. 3 more. Obviously, I'll be doing these like spaced out between days because it gets tiring talking all the time. Obviously I do need to stop and eat and stuff, but we'll get through this. We will survive.
Greetings, my friend. Welcome to Arcadia, home of shepherds, sheep, and manure. I recently made an offer to buy some nearby farmland. Unfortunately, the owner refused, based on completely unsubstantiated rumors that I once burned down 3 farms in Kos. Can you believe it? I've never burned down a farm in my life. I may have once paid someone else to do so, but I assure you, my reasons were entirely acceptable and in the best interest of everyone involved. Arcadia was well known for its sublime natural vistas. Farmers and shepherds were seduced by its beauty, and it's easy to see why. I have to leave for now, but I'll meet you again when you finish your visit. Until then, my friend!
Grain was a staple of the Greek diet, to the point where Homer referred to his compatriots as mortal eaters of bread. Grain farming was a meticulous process. Due to dry summers, artificial irrigation was impossible, so farmers had to rely on rainfall to water their crops. This gave them very narrow windows for sowing and harvesting. On a farm of this size, only half of the field would be planted every year, while the other half would lie fallow to avoid exhausting the soil. According to the poet Hesiod, the best time to sow grain was in autumn, and the best time to harvest it was in May. Fortunately, if farmers missed their opportunity, they also had a chance to plant millet in the spring.
Hesiod was a farmer turned poet from the town of Astra in Boeotia. In the 7th century BCE, he composed the Theogony, an epic poem dedicated to telling the origins of the gods. He also wrote a poem on how to live justly called Works and Days. The poem included a detailed agrarian calendar that outlined when to plant and harvest, in addition to addressing subjects like the ideal time to marry. Hesiod's poetry was so famous in antiquity that Herodotus credits him with teaching the Greeks about their gods. I mean, fair enough.
Before planting in a field, the land needed to be ploughed a total of 3 times. Once in the spring to remove weeds, again in the summer to aerate the soil, and a final time in the winter to plant the seeds in the moist earth. The plough was pulled by 2 oxen, while the sowing of seeds was done by hand. After the seeds were planted, a boy turned the soil with a hoe to protect them from hungry birds. Once the sowing was finished, the farmers waited for winter rains to irrigate the field. They also prayed to the goddess of agriculture, Demeter, and her daughter Persephone, in the hopes of being favored with a bountiful harvest come springtime.
Persephone? What the hell kind of name is Persephone? That was the first time I ever heard that name, actually. Demeter, the goddess of grain, was a sister of Zeus. When her daughter Persephone was chosen to be Hades' bride without Demeter's permission, yes, he kidnapped her, the goddess withheld all crops until Zeus pledged to release Persephone. Demeter's actions led to famine and forced Zeus to relent, and allowed Persephone to spend half of the year underground as queen of the underworld, and the other half from above ground with their mother. This is a very, very abridged version of what the story was. The story draws parallels to the planting of grain, which also spends time underground before growing from the soil. I think it was their way of explaining the seasons, which is one of the reasons why I liked Greek mythology. The full story is Hades obviously was Mr. Ono. Well, there's 2 different versions, but the version I knew first was Hades was, oh no, I'm lonely. And it was, oh no, Persephone's quite hot. I think I'll kidnap her and make her my wife. And obviously at one point Demeter couldn't find her, so she got upset. All the crops started to rot and stuff. So Zeus was like, alright, we'll find her. And I think he sent Hermes. Hermes found him, told Zeus, blah, blah, blah. So they went to Hades and they went, now come on, man. Obviously this is where it branches off, because there's either... You've got the version where he tricks her into eating the pomegranates, eating 6 of them. So that's why she's there for 6 months of the year and 6 months she's with her mother, explaining the seasons. Or there's the one where she decides to stay because Hades is actually not a bad bloke. For a god of the underworld, and apparently he isn't, he treats, according to the stories, he does treat his wife with a hell of a lot of respect. So, compared to Poseidon and Zeus, he's a better husband than all the others. In fact, compare him to most of the male gods, because even Hephaestus did some dodgy shit. Hades is quite normal, aside from his job. You know, he didn't, you know, have sex with people randomly. He didn't try and rape anyone. He didn't, in a sense he didn't. I don't think he killed anyone. He still was capable of being a bit of a bad person, but a lot of the time you look into his stories and he actually wasn't that bad. Anyway, despite what Disney's version would tell you. Although I do love James Wood's version of Hades.
Grain was harvested in the spring, using a curved knife called a sickle. With their backs to the wind, the reapers cut the plant stalks and left the sheaves behind before moving through the rest of the crop. Once the harvest was mowed, the sheaves were brought to the threshing floor.
Animal sacrifices played a large part in ancient Greek religion, but cereals also had an important sacred role. So your golden nuggets and your Rice Krispies play an important sacred role in your day. Says me who barely eats breakfast. A feta or barley meal was brought to animal sacrifices to scatter over both the animal's head as well as its roasting meat. The Greeks also offered the gods bloodless sacrifices like cakes. The cakes could be baked into specific shapes depending on the god or the type of ritual, and were made with ingredients like cheese, nuts, honeys, cereals, and dried fruit. For example, in Athens, people offered the goddess Artemis a special cheesecake known as an amphiphon, because Artemis was, I think, even though she was the goddess of the hunt, you could construe she was also a vegan. Alright, maybe not so much, because I think she liked killing things. Goddess of the hunt kind of goes against that. Forget that statement, ignore me. The Greeks also made a point of honouring gods with aparchai, or the first fruits of their farming, hunting and fishing labours. Greeks brought aparchai and wheat and barley to Demeter after the spring harvest in the hopes of ensuring fertility. Failing to honour a god with aparchai was believed to inspire divine anger that would lead to dire consequences. Just Zeus is there like, where's my fruit?
Animal husbandry was an important part of Greek agriculture. Farmers usually kept cattle, donkeys, sheep, goats, pigs, dogs, geese, and chickens. The animals mostly fed in pastures, but could also eat some of the farm's harvested grain, as well as damaged fruit and residue from olive oil and wine production. Livestock had several purposes. Their manure was used to fertilize the fields, and their grazing helped remove weeds. Arcadia was a mountainous region believed to be the home of the god Pan, so farmers were more likely to keep sheep and goats than cattle.
And also his labyrinth was around there. Oof, that film. It's good, but it's weird. Animals were kept on farms both for their labour and for the secondary products they provided, like wool and poo. Much of the heavy labour on the farm were done by oxen and donkeys who helped pull ploughs and wagons. Sheep and goats meanwhile were kept for meat, but their milk was also used for cheese. Omnivorous pigs ate table scraps and other people, and dogs helped herd and protect other animals. Cattle, sheep, goats and pigs were also offered as sacrifices to the gods. the thing of feeding them wine, I do recall that, I don't know if it might not be the Greeks that did it, but there was a thing where they actually did get like
Most
cows
farming
drunk.
tools were simple,
I might be thinking of
handmade
Egypt.
implements made of wood and occasionally tipped with iron. The most complicated tool was the plough, which was made up of several parts, including a beam, a drawbar, and a yoke. A two-pronged hoe, meanwhile, was used for tilling soil, and farmers also had tools for digging and weeding.
In Athens, land tenure and productivity were reflected in a citizen's political and social status. Citizens were ranked according to property classes, with the top tier owning holdings that produced a minimum of 500 bushels per year, the lowest tier owning no land of their own. In Sparta, meanwhile, land was distributed equally among Spartan citizens, who were supported by the crop of farming of their helots. Or helots, however they pronounce that one.
After the sheaves were harvested, workers brought them to the threshing floor to extract the grain. Oxen or donkeys were hitched to a post in the center of the floor and guided around it, while workers threw sheaves under their hooves. The animals, stomping, forced the grain kernels out of their casings. Afterwards, the kernels were collected for the winnowing process. Winnowing helped separate the heavier grain seeds from the chaff. It began with using a wooden shovel to toss the grain. While in the air, the wind blew away the lighter chaff, leaving only the heavier grain. To remove the remaining chaff, the grain was tossed in a wooden basket called a lignon, which filtered the grain until only clean kernels remained.
The Greeks used grain products to make a large variety of food and beverages. A coarse barley meal called alphyta even, could be sprinkled into milk, water, or wine to make a nutritious and occasionally medicinal potion called kychion. Hippocratic doctors prescribed kychion laced with pennyroyal to women, and the beverage was also drunk during the initiation rites of the Eleusinian Mysteries, which were held in honour of Demeter and Persephone. Alphyta was also used to make a medicinal drink called pistane. Or pitastani? We'll go with pistane. Crimon, meanwhile, was a wheat meal which was used to make bread called criminatheus, while unmilled wheat called the amylos gets boiled into a starchy pudding with the consistency of jelly. Ew. Greeks also knew how to make beer from barley, but unlike the Egyptians, they did not enjoy the drink much and preferred wine. It's mainly because they thought if you drank beer, then you were a barbarian. Drinking wine is the only way to go. But alcohol is alcohol. Yeah, it was considered a very lowly thing to drink beer. So basically, I'm a barbarian. But I do drink wine a little bit, so occasionally I'm sophisticated.
Barley, which was used to make flour, was different from other types of grain. Threshing was not enough to separate the barley from its husk. So instead, it was roasted in a specialized tool called a frigatron. After the barley was roasted, it was pounded with a mortar and pestle. The pounded grain was then ground into a meal, using either a hand mill or a hopper mill. Grinding was boring work, so workers often lightened the mood with a mill song. Once the barley was completely ground, it was sieved using a wicker basket called a koskinon, making it ready for use.
The two staple grains of the Greek diet were barley and wheat. In fact, during the classical period, their diet is thought to have been around 70 to 75% cereal-based. Wheat flour, called alorion, was used to bake a bread called aratos, but the Greeks also needed a barley meal called alphyta with water, milk, or oil to produce maza, or porridge or flatbread that could be eaten on the go. So a nice packed lunch. In Sparta, boys ate kamata after their meal, which were cakes of barley meal soaked in oil and served on a bed of laurel leaves. They also ate pancakes called tigonites? Yeah, that'll do, for breakfast. The variety of Greek cakes and breads is astonishing. Athenios listed over 70 kinds in Sophists at Dinner. Jesus Christ. Well, they had to make some variety, I suppose.
Grain storage areas needed to be dark, dry, cool, contained, and well ventilated to prevent the grain from spoiling. According to Hesiod, the preferred method of storing grain was in a pithos, the same container as Pandora's mythological box. Archaeological evidence suggests that Greeks may have also stored grain in small, walled structures woven from branches. Farms generally needed to store enough grain to sustain themselves for the year and seed corn for the next. Any surplus was either stored for a lean year or sold to markets for profit.
Not all land was owned by private individuals. Sanctuaries would encompass sacred lands as well. Sacred land could be cultivated by priests, leased out to other people, or set aside entirely. There were often rules for using the land. For example, strangers visiting the sanctuary of Athena at Elea were allowed to pasture one animal for 1 day and 1 night, but if they stayed any longer, they were required to pay a fine. Fair enough.
My friend! Good to see you again! You must feel hungry. I know I would, spending all that time watching farmers working themselves to the bone. Now,
I'm sitting
what
on my
else
ass
can I do
doing
for you?
fucking nothing.
If you say so, let's get started. According to Hesiodos, what was the best month to start harvesting grain? Yes, spring
I
was
literally
the
was
ideal
like, oh my
time
god,
for
did I even hear that?
harvesting. Yes, I'm not the only smart one around here.
I've not got one wrong yet
Time
though,
for
have I?
another
So I'm
question.
doing well.
Which tool did reapers use to cut stalks? Yes, a sickle was a curved knife, making it ideal for harvesting sheaves of grain. Only one question left. Arcadia was believed to be the home of which god? Correct! Pan supposedly called the mountainous region his home. Incredible work, my friend. It's safe to say your mind is definitely more wheat than chaff. Safe travels, my friend. We'd better be seeing each other again soon.
I mean we will, but I'd rather not. I say that every time he says that. I'd rather not. The Great Plague. Yeah, most people are like, oh, was it that plague? And I'm like, no, I think we deduced it was actually, like it said on that box, I think we deduced it was typhus or smallpox. I mean, it still killed a lot of people. Not of yet. I think you find some discovery sites, the discovery point thingies that talk about it, but I don't think you find any actual things on the tour that I remember. Pop in.
Hello, Wanderer. May I introduce you to the Keramikos, the kiln that warms all of Athens' pottery. The art produced here is some of the most beautiful in the Greek world. I envy the potter's skills, though I'm not quite as envious of their clay-stained hands. It's bad for the nails. The Keramikos was a special neighborhood in Athens, where potters created vases and containers that stood all over Greece. This tour will take you through the elaborate process needed to turn something as simple as muddy clay into ornate perfume vases and gilded wine cups. Come find me when you complete your visit, and we can talk more about what you've learned.
The Kermicus was a large, sprawling area northwest of Athens' Acropolis. While part of it was used as a graveyard, it was also dedicated to the creation of pottery. The Kermicus was so significant to the art form that its name lives on in the word ceramics. Perhaps drawn by the river, potters moved into the area and formed their own bustling community. It's believed that by the end of the 5th century BCE, hundreds of thousands of pottery vessels had been made in Athens, including everything from heavy, undecorated cooking pots to delicate and beautiful containers reserved for the most precious oils. Sadly, only around 1% of these works survive today, some only in small fragments.
Unfortunately, no ancient manuals for making pottery have survived to the present day, and there is only limited visual and textual evidence to explain how ceramic works were created. However, the vases themselves provide a few clues. Some pots were decorated with behind-the-scenes glimpses at potters and painters at work. These visual narratives, along with texts of ancient authors, suggest that pottery making was a family affair, with fathers teaching their sons the craft at a young age. One vase even shows a woman working as a painter, which again suggests that pottery making was a family business.
Raw clay from a river was hardly fit for a potter's wheel. Athenian potters used clay that was rich in iron, which created the distinctive orange-red coloring seen in Athenian pottery. But this high-quality clay needed to be handled carefully to avoid disasters in the kiln later on. The clay was first brought to settling beds, where it was mixed with water to wash out any organic debris like leaves. Once it was purified, workers kneaded the clay with their hands to push out air bubbles and create the texture necessary for a flawless finish. One of the goals of these early steps was to remove any impurities that could destroy a delicate design, or worse, render a vase unusable.
While we describe Athenian vases as painted, their red and black designs weren't actually the result of paint, but as a special preparation of the clay itself known as a slip. Levigated slips were named after a process in which water was used to help refine the finest particles of clay from the coarser, heavier ones, leaving a solution that was equal parts water and clay. Different clays with different mineral compositions offered a palette of options for pottery makers. For example, white clay were used to add light highlights in black and red figure scenes. Slips were also a key element of vase construction and were used to help attach segments of larger vases together and to help anchor elements like handles to the body of the vessel.
Once the clay was cleaned, it was up to the potter to shape it into a vase by spinning it on a wheel or pressing it into a mold. Their choice depended on what shape they wanted for the vase, but they also considered the possible scope of its decoration. Potters did not work alone. A workshop might have had many people working together on different aspects of production. Potters collaborated with many different painters for decorating their creations. Some of these painters even became potters themselves. All in all, a single vase could be worked on by many different artists, with each one focusing on a different aspect of its design.
Oh, jeez. Oh dear, that's horrible. Anyway, vases often had inscriptions known as poetiers, or signatures, that identified the workshop or owner responsible for the overall production of the vase. Sometimes a vase named both its potter and its painter. And I've just seen the man lying there, and it looks like he's got a... You know... Most Athenian potters and painters remain anonymous. But over the years, scholars have identified the specific styles of hundreds of individual artists and workshops. Even though their names have been lost, these identifications have been achieved by examining different qualities on the vases, such as the placement of relief lines, sketch designs, and even the shapes of painted eyes and noses. And, of course, the num that's on that man. Stop there long enough, you'll know what I mean.
After the pots were shaped and decorated, they were packed into kilns for the lengthy and delicate firing process. The process had 3 stages: oxidation, reduction, and reoxidation. The main purpose of the firing process was to carefully manage the clay's exposure to oxygen. The chemical reactions caused by firing gave the pots their distinctive orange-red coloring. This also turned the designs made from the clay decoration slips glossy and black. The most difficult part of the firing process was managing the fires themselves. It required an enormous amount of skill and experience to properly judge the exact temperatures needed, and even the smallest mistake could ruin several hours of work.
Experimental archaeological projects and scientific advancements have changed the way researchers understand the ancient firing process. For example, instead of firing a single cycle, it's possible some pottery workshops fired vases twice or even more. While discarded shards, misfires, and damaged or unfinished vases may seem like mistakes, they actually offer new clues as to how ancient Greek pottery workshops functioned. Well, yeah.
Vases could be decorated in all sorts of ways. Before 530 BCE, Athenian vases were decorated using the black figure technique, where figures and designs were painted as dark silhouettes. At the end of the 6th century BCE, painters created a new technique called red figure, an inversion of the painting process that left the figures in red and the background in black. This gave the artist more freedom to better explore details like muscles and individual locks of hair. Designs were sketched onto the bare surface of the pot using a thin, sharp tool. Thin relief lines, which helped define subtle elements like facial features, were added
He's
using
that
a
good,
brush
he's
made
painting
of
with an
few
invisible
stiff
paintbrush.
hairs. More elaborate vases were sometimes gilded, but these decorations were so delicate, they were most likely only added after the firing process.
Designs were not painted onto vases in the same way we view painting today. Athenian vase painting used a kind of slip, a mixture of clay and water, that became a glaze when the vase was fired. Different dilutions and concentrations allowed artists to adjust qualities like colour and opacity for even finer designs. Out of the way, chicken!
You've returned! As you can see, pottery was an arduous and delicate process, but was exemplary of the skill and craftsmanship that dominated Greek art and culture. Now, is there something else you'd like to do? Then let's get right to it, starting with an easy question. What was responsible for the orange-red color of most Athenian vases? Correct. Athenian potters worked with clay that was rich with iron, and that iron created a distinctive orange-red coloring.
I actually
On
guessed
to the
that.
next question. What were the chambers for firing pottery called? A frigatron is a special tool for
see, there we
roasting
go.
barley. Keep trying.
I'm going to go with kiln. I'm probably right.
Correct.
Ah, well,
Pottery was
I wasn't
fired
sure if they
in
called them
and the
kilns.
firing process was extremely precise and delicate in nature.
Get out of the
You're
kiln!
almost done. Just one more question. The firing process was made up of how many stages? Correct. The 3 stages of the firing process were oxidation, reduction, and reoxidation. You know your pottery. Well done, Wanderer.
Can I
Then
go
we
now?
must part ways, at least for now. Farewell, Wanderer.
You're more better to talk to than Marcus. Speaking of, you better not be at the last one. Never says exactly who's there. Oh, God.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to Kythera, where clothes are dyed and noses are assaulted by disgusting smells.
Oh, I thought that was you.
I think it smells terrible, and I can't wait to get out of here. The colors are pretty, though. This little island was where dyers brought all the color to Greek fashion through an intensely stinky procedure. This tour will reveal the steps it took for workers to brew the dye. Try not to step in any mollusk guts as you enjoy your visit. I promise I'll meet you at the end of your tour. See you soon, my friend.
In Greece, fabric and clothing were colored using natural dyes from shellfish, insects, and plants. Skilled craftsmen across the Greek world extracted dyes from these sources and combined them with other substances to create a variety of colors. The dyeing process supposedly produced incredibly pungent smells, and ancient writers would often comment on the stink in their works.
The craft of leatherworking became very common in the classical period. While the Greeks had plenty of cattle to provide skins for leather, they preferred to import hides from trading centres like Thrace, Kyrene, and Sicily. Most tanneries operated on the outskirts of populated areas due to the strong smell. That's not surprising. Tanning began with cleaning and softening the hides by soaking them in water, then pounding them to remove flesh and fat. Afterwards, the skins were soaked in mortar, mixed with urine, and covered with an alkaline lime to loosen the hair, which was then scraped off with a knife. Following this, they were softened in a vat of water mixed with animal dung, then beaten and kneaded. Finally, the hides were stretched out on frames and immersed in a mixture of water and crushed tree bark, which made them softer, waterproof, and resistant to bacteria, despite being covered in wee and poo.
Murex is the generic name for 3 species of mollusks that reside in the Mediterranean. The substance they secrete was used by craftsmen to create the most expensive dyes in the ancient world, the most famous of which was Tyrian purple. Fishing techniques varied depending on the type of mollusk. In shallow waters, fishermen could simply dive and catch the mollusks, but they set traps if the water was too deep. Being
Synchronized
carnivorous,
trapping.
murex were often lured using dead animal flesh as bait. It was imperative that the mollusks be captured alive, as they only secreted the precious purple liquid needed for dyes upon death.
The craft and trade of dyeing was believed to have originated in Crete before becoming widespread in classical Greece. Due to the need for marine mollusks, most dyeing-related activities took place in coastal areas. During the classical period, there were large-scale dyeing workshops in Athens and Orythnos. The towns of Meliboea in Thessaly and Hermione in Argolis were also renowned for their dyes. The Greek writer Pausanias estimated that half the population of Bolis, a town in Phocis, dedicated themselves to fishing for purple-producing mollusks. He also praised the Laconian coast for having the best seashells for producing purple dye. The island of Kythia off the Laconian coast even became known as the Purple Island. Better than the Red Island, because it's all about the blood.
The purple liquid that made up most dyes came from a gland in the murex. To collect it, workers would either crack open the mollusk's shell with a knife, or if it was smaller, crush it with a stone. Each mollusk only produced a small amount of liquid, and thousands of them were needed to produce even a gram of the substance. Because of this, captured mollusks were usually kept alive in seawater immersed baskets until enough had accumulated to produce a satisfactory amount of dye.
Some archaeological sites have revealed the existence of small single household workshops filled with equipment for processing purple dye and dyeing fabrics. Other sites, meanwhile, have revealed multiple neighbouring houses that contain similar dyeing equipment, suggesting a community of dyers. Large-scale dyeing was carried out by highly skilled slaves and free workers, while the process was run by wealthy people. Members of these families were not involved in production. Oh, the wealthy are doing the dirty work. No.
The mollusk glands were mixed with salt and left to decompose for 3 days. Afterwards, the resulting mash was placed in a vat, where it boiled until it was thickened and reduced to 1/16 of its original volume. The dyers stirred this mixture and removed any impurities. This process produced the foul odor so reviled by ancient writers.
Dyeing installations can be reimagined and reconstructed from archaeological evidence and testimonies from ancient writers. One of the key archaeological sites for understanding the ancient dyeing process is at Rachi Hill, near the sanctuary of Isthmia. That'll do. It features a complex installation of vats and tanks, as well as a large water cistern and a well. Purple shells and loom weights were also found at the site, indicating that it was once a centre for dyeing and weaving.
Dyers checked the hue of the purple liquid by dipping in raw wool. The hue could be changed by adjusting the temperature of the liquid and by soaking the wool for different periods of time, with longer soaking producing deeper shades. The wool was dyed once before spinning and again before weaving to ensure it maintained its color. While murex purple dyed wool easily, it did not adhere as well to other fabrics, such as linen.
According to a Phoenician legend, purple dye was discovered when the god Melgart and the nymph Tyros were walking along a beach with their dog. As you do. The dog bit into a large mollusk and its snout was stained purple. Impressed, Tyros asked for a dress dyed with the same colour. Purple garments are also mentioned in works like the Iliad and the Odyssey, usually worn by kings and heroes, and that's probably why we use it now. For example, Helen of Troy weaved a large purple cloth depicting battle scenes between Trojans and Achaeans, and Penelope provided her husband Odysseus with a woolen purple cloak upon his departure. Greek poets of the classical period generally considered purple clothing to be garments of heroes and gods. I mean, the Romans did, didn't they? Wasn't it called imperial purple? Or take the purple?
Most Greek garments were made from rectangular
And of
fabric
course you got the royal
that
purple.
was rarely cut or sewn. They were normally folded around the body, with girdles, pins, and buttons. Dyeing served to give the garments a more unique style. Decorations were also widely used, and were either woven or painted on. They depicted things like animals, human figures, and mythological scenes.
While shellfish were used for the extraction of purple dye, other colours could be produced from other sources. Yellow was obtained from saffron, red could be extracted from madder plants or insects of the Kermes genus, and blue was obtained from woad plants. Woad. Shellfish dyes were brighter and richer than plant dyes, but they were also more costly. Cheaper shades of purple could be produced by mixing blue and red dyes in different quantities. Ah, but we know it's all a load of fakery. And no doubt people could tell the difference. Probably wasn't quite the same hue.
Textile manufacturing and trade was one of the most lucrative businesses in classical Athens. Textiles were made of either wool or linen, with wool being the most common. Women produced the garments worn in domestic life, although some men ran professional workshops that fulfilled the same need. Other textiles were made by slaves and laborers under the supervision of master weavers, fullers, and dyers.
An emphytron, also called an onos, was a tool used to turn wool into rovings. A few hundred ceramic ephetra have been discovered. They were produced in Athenian workshops during the classical period. Some scholars suggest that earlier versions of the tool could have been made of wood or leather. Ephentra were frequently associated with weddings and could be decorated with scenes depicting spinning, weaving, and or mythical weddings. Take your pick. What fancy stuff do you want on your... whatever it is. Could have put to a footstool.
Clothes didn't just keep people warm. They were used as a way to communicate social identities, like gender, status, and ethnicity. These could be expressed through garments and accessories, but also jewelry, hairstyles, perfumes, and cosmetics. Wealthy Greeks usually had garments of the highest quality, and all their accessories were decorated with gold, silver, or gemstones. Parasols and fans were also an important part of elite fashion, and were usually carried by accompanying slaves.
During the classical period, Greek jewellery making became more sophisticated with the introduction of new techniques. Typical jewellery included earrings, pins, bracelets, armbands, finger rings, diadems, and other hair ornaments. At the end of the classical period, these items were occasionally inlaid with precious stones like emeralds, pearls, and amethysts. The clothing of wealthy women could also be sewn with jewels. Jewels were often engraved with vegetal and animal motifs, or depictions of gods and heroes. Like clothes, jewellery was a symbol of status and wealth that was often passed from generation to generation. However, jewellery could also function as an offering to the gods or as a funerary deposit.
The most common Greek garments were the peplos, the chiton, and the hymation. The peplos, typically worn by women, was a body-length cloth. It was folded back on itself and worn draped over the body and pinned over the shoulders. The chiton was a long garment with sleeves. Ankle-length chitones were normally worn by women, while men wore shorter versions of the garment. A hymation was a mantle that was worn over both the chiton and the peplos. Outside of daily life, there were also specialized clothes worn only in exceptional situations like weddings and religious ceremonies.
With the exception of slaves and young girls, many women in classical Greece wore some type of hairband. Adult women often had their hair tied in a ponytail or something similar, while young girls wore their hair more loosely. Most Greek men had their hair cut short. Beards and moustaches, meanwhile, were a matter of personal taste and fashion. Yes, stroke my beard that's not even grown fully yet. Elite men preferred not to cover their heads, except occasionally with their mantle veil when they wanted to avoid attention. Hats such as the pylos, canonical, and pestassos, wide-brimmed, were used to protect their wearers against the sun or bad weather. They were typically worn by farmers, soldiers, and travellers. I mean, I'm not a hat person myself. God, we're going to really muck this one up.
Good to see you again, my friend. I bet your clothes feel heavier now that you know how many mollusks were killed to dye them. But let's change the subject, yes? What else can I do for you? Then let's get right into it, starting with this question. Which purple dye was the most famous?
Tyrians.
Yes, the purple created from murex secretions was
Because,
one of the most
seriously,
expensive
it's my
and
dye.
well-known dyes in
I
the
dye
world.
and I know things.
Here's another question. How did workers check the dye's hue? Correct. Workers dip wool
don't think they'll
into the
dip the
mixture
finger in, that'd be
to
a bad
gauge
idea.
the exact hue of the dye. Almost done, my friend. Just one final question. Which body-length garment was typically worn by women? Correct. A peplos was a body-length
Can you give me
cloth
two that look
woman
similar?
draped over her body and pinned around her shoulders.
She looks
I
nice.
had no
Every time I
idea
hear
you
his
were
voice,
so
just
knowledgeable
nice.
about fashion. But look at you. I should have known from what you're wearing.
I'm going to kill you now. Oh
You
wait,
got it,
the
my
discovery tool
friend.
doesn't allow you to
Farewell
kill.
for now.
Good. Go away. Right, well, there we are. We're done for all the daily life tours. So, join me next time where we'll be going on to politics and philosophy. Yes, that should be interesting. So, see you next time. Bye-bye.